Welcome to CrossExamined tonight. I'm Ralph McBride. I want to welcome you to Lamar University and welcome all the folks that are online. You've got a significant viewing audience online, and we really appreciate that. I'm a part of an organization called Truth Unveiled. If you got a piece of paper from us, that's a group of guys that want to bring events like this to college campuses and high school campuses in the upper Gulf Coast area. So if you would like to win a set of AirPods, there's a red QR code. Scan that, and you'll go to a website and go ahead and put your information in. We're going to be taking information that we can use to connect back to you, but we also are going to announce the winner of the iPods Monday night at 7 o'clock. So it's going to be done online. And it will be a winner from any of the three events. We were in Lake Charles last night. We were in Orange, Texas, Wednesday night, and then tonight we'll have our final event for Frank. He and Clint have been working a lot and running like crazy, doing things with us. So we really appreciate the visit. I want to encourage you to check out the book table too before you go. There's some incredible resources there. We want to make sure that you take advantage of those. I also want to thank the Chi Alpha and BSM leadership, Andy Giles and Darren Ford. Great guys. We couldn't have done this event without them, and I marvel at their ability to cooperate and move together despite the fact that organizations like that often are a little more competitive, and sometimes you can't get that cooperation, but that's not the problem here. I want to make sure that you guys attend, the students that are here, make sure that you avail yourselves of those Bible studies and the activities that they have. And I want to go ahead and just do a brief introduction of Frank. I've got to know him a little, driving around in the truck with him and doing some other things. He's really got an answer for everything. There used to be a guy we had on radio called the Bible Answer Man. Dr. Walter Martin was his name. If you go back, as far as I do, I would say Frank is the new Bible Answer Man. He is going to be ready to answer any of your questions about Scripture, any of your questions about what he has tonight. College students, take notes, because, as I said last night, there'll be a quiz on this. It's called Life. This is stuff you'll be able to apply for every situation that you're in. So I want to make sure that we give Frank a great Southeast Texas welcome. Join me.
Ralph, if I can answer every question, why does my wife ask me questions I can't answer? There's plenty of those. Well, good evening, Cardinals. Gentlemen, when you see a lady come in, if you don't mind giving her your seat, that would be nice. But let's go back. Maybe I need to turn this down because I'm a New Jersey loudmouth. So stand by. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Is that... Hang on. Is that better? No? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. How's that, Clint? Is that good? All right. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's High School in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, San Diego, California, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. There are only 3 ships in the world of this class, and one of them is named after Michael Mansour. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people can tend to embellish things. Also, it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room have ever seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you're going to realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity's true. Not just true for me, not just true for you, but true for everybody, like gravity's true for everybody. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show, which is on Wednesday nights on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. How many here have Roku? All right, a lot of Roku. Look for NRB TV on Roku for National Religious Broadcasters. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Beaumont right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, if you go to our website, crossexamined.org, right there at that time, you can watch the show streaming live. Also, we're on radio every Saturday morning. I think there's probably a station in the Beaumont area. It's an AFR station, American Family Radio. What's the number? 90, 90.5? All right, 90.5, but if you can't get it on radio, that's fine. It's podcasted. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We actually do 2 a week. And what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it based on our ministry, crossexamined.org. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. We're going to go through these at about 30,000 feet and then go to Q&A. Actually, I think Ralph may have said we're going to do Q&A. That's not true. We're not going to do Q&A. We're going to do all Q, no A. All right? Everyone can ask a question. Takes all the pressure off me. All right. No, we'll do Q&A later. All right. Well, first question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. All truth is relative. Well, we've got to deal with that because if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true, right? Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Of course there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, if there was no truth, would you ever read a book? Would you be spending thousands of dollars to come to university? You're not here to learn opinions, right? You're here to learn truth. If there was no truth, could you ever catch someone in a lie? I mean, lies presuppose truth, right? Of course there's truth, so we're going to deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that God really exists. These arguments are in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, you can show that God exists without any reference to any religious work. In fact, did people know there was a God before there was a Bible? Yeah, of course. So we're going to look at that evidence. Third question, are miracles possible? Christianity can't be true if miracles are not possible. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. We'll see that tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? Particularly with regard to the resurrection. Look, the New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if we have good evidence from the scriptures, from the New Testament documents, and other evidence outside the New Testament to let us know if Jesus really rose from the dead. Why? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. If you're a Christian, you might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, as Paul himself said to the church at Corinth, if Christ hasn't risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. You can see if this historical event took place. If it did, Christianity's true. If it didn't, it's false. You with me? Now, from that point, you can show the entire Bible's the Word of God, but we don't have time to get into that. It's all in the book. What we're going to do right now is start right here at point 1, does truth exist? Are you guys ready to go? All right. Whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, Cardinals. That was lame. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle, that's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Man, that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that in school? You can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here tonight, whether you're an atheist or a Christian or anywhere in between, the next few minutes, I think, is the most important thinking skill I've ever learned. And to show you what a dimwit I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you now, this thinking skill. And you know why I didn't know it? Because I never had a course in logic. How many people in this room have had a course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? All right, see these people with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers. See them? There they are, right there. We don't teach logic in public school anymore. Instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that's dangerous. Why? Because if you live your life just based on your feelings and not reason and not morality, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. Oh, yeah, logic, emotion makes life fun, but logic makes life safe. And what we're going to talk about is one law of logic that once I learned it, I said, this is the most valuable thinking skill I've ever learned. You already know this law of logic. You just may have forgotten you know it. It's called the law of non-contradiction. And it says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. Like, for example, we can't both be at Lamar University and not at Lamar University at the same time and in the same sense, right? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. They're good. I'm telling you, they are good. Look, I speak at 150 words a minute with Gus to 350. I don't know how you're keeping up over here. The law of non-contradiction says that God can't both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense, right? He either exists or he doesn't, but not both. You with me? All right. Now, this law of non-contradiction, once you learn it and are able to apply it, can save you from a lot of pain and suffering. Why do I say that? Because there are so many false statements and principles that people believe and try and live their lives by that ultimately, if they continue to try and live their lives by, they're going to smack up against reality and it's going to hurt. So this law of non-contradiction will help us particularly deal with these false claims that we hear in our culture. And probably the biggest false claim we hear in our culture is the fact that relativism and postmodernism, the claim that there is no truth, that claim is prevalent in our culture, and I'm going to show you how to deal with it using the law of non-contradiction. Suppose someone were to say to you, there is no truth. If someone were to say that, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because this is a self-defeating statement. What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. Notice that this statement right here claims to be true while at the same time claiming there is no truth. This violates the law of non-contradiction. It would be like if I said I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? You're using English to say it. Or if I said my parents had no kids that lived. Right? Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one, all right? These are known as self-defeating statements, and you got to get good at recognizing self-defeating statements. And here's how you do it. When somebody says something, you ask a question. And the question you ask is what you do when you turn a claim on itself. So if someone says there is no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that true? Turn the claim on itself. And by the way, you can amaze your friends with this. Why? Because you're not being unkind. You're not making statements. You're asking questions, right? If they say something that's wrong, you're not saying, you bonehead, that's wrong. You're simply asking a question. When they say there's no truth, you simply ask, is that true? All right, let's do a few more. Suppose someone were to say there's no such thing as absolute truth. If someone were to say that and you were to turn the claim on itself, what question would you ask back? Yeah, is that an absolute truth? Or you might want to say, are you absolutely sure? Because can everyone see this is an absolute truth claim claiming there are no such things as absolute truths. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, in our culture, it's not said this way much anymore. It's more often said, or at least hinted at, this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you have your truth, I have my truth, you live your truth, I'll live my truth, we'll all get along. This sounds so right, doesn't it? It sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? There's just one big problem with it. It's logically self-defeating. Why? Because if someone says there isn't the truth, only my truth, if you turn the claim on itself, here's the question you ought to ask. Is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on top here just your truth, just your opinion? Well, if it is, why should I believe it? But if you're saying the statement on top is the truth for everybody, can everybody see that the first half of the statement claims there aren't any the truths? Can everyone see this is a the truth statement, claiming there are no such thing as the truth statements? It defeats itself. Now, I know it's very unpopular to say this in our culture, but sorry, I got to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you're going to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. You guys are in engineering school, right? You can't have your own math, right? I mean, imagine if, say, Ralph said to me, there he is. Suppose he said to me, hey, Frank, can you hang out an extra day here at Lamar University? We got some things we need to do, and you can help out. And if you stay, I'll pay you $10 an hour. You just tell me how many hours you work at the end of the day, and I'll pay you. No, actually, Ralph would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. All right. But let's suppose that I did. I hung out a whole day here tomorrow. I worked dawn to dusk, 15 hours. I'm done. He says, okay, what do I owe you? I said, okay, $10 an hour times 15 hours. You owe me $150,000. And he's going to say, I don't owe you $150,000. I owe you $150,000. And I go, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. He's going to say you're crazy. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, hey, this isn't my math. Right? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there's one answer to a math problem. Not my answer or your answer, but the answer. Right? And the same thing is true with truth in general. It's not my truth or your truth. There's just the truth. And if you start thinking you can have your own truth, eventually you're going to smack up against reality, and it's going to hurt. This is probably one of the biggest complaints in our culture. You ought not judge. In fact, if you're a Christian, people are going to say, Jesus said don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's put Jesus aside for just a second. Logically, what's the problem with the claim? If somebody says you ought not judge, if you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask? Yeah, you're going to say, hey, is that a judgment? Or if they say you ought not judge, you might want to say, then why are you judging me for judging? Notice this is a judgment here. You say, wait a minute, Frank, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did. He said it in his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, judge not. All right. I know this is going to sound odd for just a second, but stick with me, it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography of Jesus that we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text. Why? It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of books that we put under one binding if you didn't have numbers. I mean, imagine if you're a Christian, you go to church one Sunday morning, you don't have numbers in your Bible, the pastor doesn't have numbers in his Bible, and he gets up to the podium and he just looks at you and he goes, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. Right? No, you couldn't do that, right? You need numbers to help you find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. You got to read around the passage to see what's going on. The Bible is not just a discrete list of verses that you can just pick out and apply to your life. In fact, some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow, okay? This is why you should never say Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah 29? You know Jeremiah 29:11. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in the future. This is on birthday cards. This is on coffee mugs. This is on posters. This is on pillows. This is everywhere. Is this a promise to 21st century Christians living in Beaumont, Texas? No. Who is that a promise to? That was a promise to the exiles who were forcibly taken out of Judah in 586 BC by the Babylonian dictator Nebuchadnezzar. He took them all the way to Babylon, modern-day Iraq, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, was promising those people that 70 years later, he was going to bring them back into the land and prosper them. And actually, that's what happened. In 516 BC, they went back in the land and began to build the temple. This is not a promise to us today. When people say, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise that God made to the exiles that went to Egypt that year. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No. We've got to stop taking stuff out of context. The same thing is true with Matthew 7:1. Does Jesus just say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? Judge not, lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, you hypocrite. Notice, you hypocrite is a judgment. Then you'll be better able to help your brother. Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. In fact, elsewhere, Jesus says in John 7:24, he says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You have to make judgments. You have to make judgments whether you're going to be a Christian or an atheist or something else. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight. Now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. No. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. Bible's not telling the truth. There is no objective meaning or purpose to life. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's over. It's hopeless. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? The Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? What was their job? What did they do? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Many of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council to whom Rome delegated day-to-day lawmaking authority. Translation, they were the politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus did this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's arguing with these Pharisee politicians, and he's right in the middle of an argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? You imagine you're having an argument with somebody, and you stop right in the middle, and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really goes after these Pharisee politicians. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs. But on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes. Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How often do you hear those passages talked about? But many of you in this room know those passages are true because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. And you should be. You should be following Jesus and not what your friends or culture says, because he is the truth. But too often, we'll throw Jesus under the bus so we can get approval from the culture, won't we? That's right. So, don't buy into this idea that Jesus was always sweet and nice. Oh, by the way, since it is an election year, I need to tell you this. Let me state right off the bat that I'm no fan of either candidate. But I will tell you this. When Jesus was talking to the politicians, he said this. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You're tithing your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you're neglecting the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the former without neglecting the latter. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. What's he saying? Translation. He's saying the politicians of his day were majoring in the minors. They were tithing their spices, but neglecting the bigger issues. You know, we're doing that in our country right here. We're telling people what light bulbs we can and can't use, but we won't say don't murder your children. Kamala Harris wants to ban plastic straws, but she doesn't want to ban child mutilation. In fact, she wants the government to pay for it. Are we neglecting the more important matters of the law? Remember, when you go to the voting booth, vote on the more important matters of the law. You could probably find things you like in both parties, but which of the two platforms is majoring in the minors, and which of the two platforms is majoring in the majors? That's how you have to vote. I don't like either candidate, neither do I, but remember, you're not voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, implement a platform. It's not one person. There's a whole bunch of people going there, and they're either going to try and put the Democrat platform into law or the Republican platform. Choose wisely, Skywalker. Don't major in the minors. Now, we could spend a lot more time on these self-defeating statements, but we don't have time. I want to sum it up all this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Which means relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, tragically, most of our universities and many of our high schools have bought into postmodernism. Now, why would you ever spend a whole ton of dough coming to a university so some professor could tell you the truth, there is no truth? I don't think they do that in the engineering department, do they? They don't tell you you can build a bridge however you want to. You know, you got your truth. Other people have their truth. But in some of the other departments, they're trying to say, it's just your truth. It's nonsense. Don't buy into it. Otherwise, you're going to be hurting yourself and hurting others. In fact, we go to a lot of colleges and present this information. We always set up a Q&A mic. Here is an event we had at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And when we set up the mic later, if you're not a Christian, thank you for being here, but if you ask a question, I may ask you a question back, and it's not fair for me to do that without you knowing what the question is in advance, so I'm going to tell you the question I might ask you right now. Here's the question. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had non-believers stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No. I thought you claimed to be rational. I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it you wouldn't believe something that was actually true? Because it's not a matter of reason. It's not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately selfish and sinful things, yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 years old knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. If you just live for yourself all the time and you just follow your every impulse and your every whim, who's going to put up with that? And if somebody does put up with it, it's probably not going to be a very fruitful relationship. No, if you just live for yourself all the time, you're going to wind up divorced, addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. If you want contentment, you got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. So don't buy into this idea that you can just live for you all the time. Ask yourself that question. If Christianity were true, would I become a Christian? If you're hesitating or saying no, not a head problem, heart problem. Now, I know why some people don't want to be Christians, because Christians are often jerks. In fact, maybe you're not a Christian because you have church hurt. Or there are people you know who are claim to be Christians and are jerks. Dr. John Dixon, who teaches at Wheaton College, he's originally from down under, wrote a book called Bullies and Saints, where he goes through the church history from Jesus' time to now. Every century, he spends about a chapter on it. He talks about what the church did well and what it didn't do well. And he asks people who have been hurt by the church or some Christian this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful, or your father wasn't true and beautiful, or your Christian friend isn't true and beautiful, that doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. In fact, a number of years ago, I debated the new atheist Christopher Hitchens. Anyone remember Christopher Hitchens? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And in one of the debates, he had written a book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, talking about all the evil religious people have done. And during the debate, I said, Christopher, you're right. Religious people have done a lot of evil things. But, you have no way of actually knowing what evil is, because in your worldview, there's no standard of good, which means evil can't even exist. But let's leave that aside. I agree with you that Christians and other faiths have done a lot of evil things. But you're proving our worldview. We're not perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need a Savior. In fact, I said to him, when people say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. To say I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there would be like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. That's why they're at the gym. They're trying to get into shape. And one reason you're at the church is so you can get into shape morally and spiritually. So, there is truth. You can know it. The question is, are you going to accept it? The next question, is it true that God exists? And I mentioned there are three arguments for God we're going to look at. There are more arguments than this. We're just going to look at three briefly. The first argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe, and it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says if there's design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. The third argument isn't a science argument, it's more philosophical in nature, but you've all intuitively understood this argument since you were a very small child. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to walk into a school and shoot 9-year-olds, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity that we're obligated to obey, then everything's just a matter of opinion. It's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against a school shooter's opinion. Well, we know these issues aren't just a matter of opinion. They're really wrong. If they're really wrong, there must be a standard of really right outside of ourselves that we're obligated to obey. I don't know if you've noticed this lately, but in our country, we seem to be inventing rights about every 10 minutes. Have you noticed this? Yet many of the people who say they have these new rights are atheists. They have no standard beyond themselves. It's just their opinion. Do you realize if there is no God, there are no rights? I mean, if there is no God, there's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There are no trans rights, there are no Christian rights, there are no human rights. There aren't rights of any kind. Because without God, everything is just a preference. It's just a matter of opinion. Yet everyone in this room knows that certain issues like murder are not just a matter of opinion. If that's the case, then God exists. Now, we don't have time to go into all these arguments. We're just going to spend a little bit of time on the first argument, the cosmological argument. You got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? Did you see what God just did? Some of you are saying, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to... Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 6 years ago, said this, despite being an atheist. Here's what he said. He said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Hawking had no real explanation for how the universe could come into existence without God, but he's admitting the evidence. Even agnostic cosmologists do the same thing. This is Alexander Vilenkin, who teaches at Tufts University. And he said this about the beginning. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? Cosmologist studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there's two interesting words here in this quote from Vilenkin. The first word is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. New information can come in and overturn an existing theory. I know you can't trust everything on Wikipedia, but you know that Wikipedia has a page of overturned scientific theories. They happen all the time. But Vilenkin is so confident in all the evidence he sees that he's willing to call it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. Why is it a problem for scientists that there was a cosmic beginning? Because scientists try and find a natural cause for everything. The problem is, if nature itself didn't exist, how can there be a natural cause for nature? How can there be a natural cause for the universe? This implies there's something outside the universe, something beyond nature, something supernature that brought it into existence. We'll see what that is here in just a minute. Now, we're not going to go through the scientific evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's hardly even controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. What is controversial is what caused the universe to have a beginning. We'll get to that. But I want to show you one piece of evidence from philosophy that I think shows beyond any doubt that the universe had a beginning. And it's a timeline. Let's take a look at the timeline for a second. Here's today, here's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, there's last week, right? Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. Here's my question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? This is the interactive portion of the program. Why can't it be infinite into the past? Why? Why did it have to have a beginning? Yes, because if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. Why? Because look, if there's an infinite number of days before this day, you'd always have to live another day before you got to this day. Why? Because there's an infinite number of days before this day. I can see some of you have intellectual constipation. I get it, okay? But think about it. If there's an infinite number of days, you would never get to this day, so there only must be a finite number of days, a limited number of days before today, which means time had a beginning. So what could have created time? Only something timeless. And whatever that is, that timeless thing, did that timeless thing have a beginning? No. Therefore, it didn't have a cause. If this is God, this means the question, who made God, makes no sense. Because God, by definition, wasn't made. God is the uncaused first cause. He's the timeless, eternal one. There has to be an uncaused first cause. It's either the universe or something outside the universe. Yet all the evidence shows the universe had a beginning. So it must be something outside the universe. By the way, this is called the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, let's just jump to the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone. I was at Texas A&M, must have been 15 years ago, and some atheist said, oh, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, number one? Let's take a look at number two first. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, do you realize that everyone believes in at least one miracle? I mean, Christians believe in this miracle, and many others, but atheists believe in one miracle, at least many of them do. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. Now, which one of these views takes more blind faith? Number one, exactly. They think that no one created something out of nothing. Now, the question is, if space, time, and matter really had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? Only something outside of space, time, and matter. Something that transcends space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. There's no scientific argument that gets you all the way to Jesus. All we're saying is, this cause could be the God of the Bible. We have 6 attributes from this one argument that could be the God of the Bible. But if we keep going through the evidence and we realize that Jesus really did rise from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,991 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We don't know it yet, but this might be the God of the Bible. All right? Now, here's another question to ask an atheist. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? I mean, why does anything exist if there is no God? Why do you exist? Why do I exist? Why does the universe exist? It seems that this question is a very good question that the philosopher Leibniz many years ago posed. If cause and effect holds, there has to be an uncaused first cause. All right, now, we don't have time to do these other arguments, but I just want to say one word about the design argument, the teleological argument. There are two aspects to this. One is that the universe appears to be designed. The second is that life appears to be designed. You appear to be designed. Let's just look at the universe for just a second. In recent decades, scientists have discovered that the universe is fine-tuned to support life. That if you were to change any one of a number of attributes about our universe ever so slightly, either the universe wouldn't exist, or if it did exist, it couldn't support life. I just want to give you one out of more than a dozen of these factors for our universe. There's about 100, more than 100 for our solar system, but here's just one about our universe. The ratio of the strength of gravity to the strong nuclear force is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from Central America all the way to Greenland and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Then take all those dimes and all those piles, put them into one humongous pile, mark 1 dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on that huge pile, ask him to pick 1 dime at random. The chance that he would pick that 1 red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. Look, there's only 2 explanations for why that value, that ratio from gravity to the strong nuclear force is where it is. It was either designed to be there or it wasn't. Which view makes more sense? It was designed. In fact, even atheists admit this is the hardest one for them to answer. Christopher Hitchens said, this is a hard one. Richard Dawkins, this is a hard one. We don't know how to answer this one. You know how they try and answer it? They try and say, well, there's a whole bunch of universes out there and ours just appears to be designed. They're making it up, ladies and gentlemen. They're inventing universes that we can't detect to say, oh, this happens just to be the luck of the draw. It doesn't work. All right. Now, if we had time to go through all these arguments, you know what we would discover? We would discover that there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things to this very moment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the God of the Bible identified without even looking at the Bible. This is called natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know that a creator God exists. In fact, God has written 2 books. Yes, he's written a book through men called the Bible. That's his word. But God has also done works. He's done his word, but he's also done works. What are works? Nature, conscience, design. In fact, when anybody asks me, why do I think God exists? I say this. I know God exists by his effects. If there's a creation, and there is, that's an effect, I'm reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design, that's the effect, I'm reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on my heart that tells me right from wrong, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a moral lawgiver. If I have the ability to reason and ascertain truths outside of my skull about the real world, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause, a mind. If there's evidence that a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could predict and accomplish a resurrection from the dead? Only someone outside of time. Someone like God. This is what you do when you're trying to discover what particular cause caused a particular effect. This is what scientists do. What is science? It's a search for causes. You're trying to discover what particular cause caused a particular effect. By the way, you're doing the same thing if you think you've had some sort of personal experience with God. You think, well, God has answered my prayers or God spoke to me somehow. You're doing the same thing. You're saying the effect is the answered prayer or the communication, and you're reasoning from the effect back to cause. That's what scientists do. They go from effect to cause. Here's why atheism can't work. They have no cause. Even the natural laws that they say can do all these things, where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. In fact, you know what Stephen Hawking in his last book said about the beginning of the universe? The last book he wrote in 2010 called The Grand Design. Here's what Hawking said how the universe got here. And I'm quoting. This is from page 180. He said, because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. Can you create yourself out of nothing? First of all, you got to exist to create anything. The universe didn't exist. Secondly, gravity doesn't create anything. Gravity is an effect of the creation. In fact, after he said this, the esteemed philosopher from Oxford University, John Lennox, who happens to be a Christian, said this about Hawking. He said, when brilliant scientists talk nonsense, it's still nonsense. So we have good evidence that God exists. The next question is, are miracles possible? Well, you know what we ought to say right now? If God exists, of course miracles are possible. But a lot of people don't think miracles are possible. In fact, a lot of people think miracles are impossible, like Noah and the ark. Hey, Christians, can we just agree on one thing in here? Noah and the ark is crazy. Admit it. Come on. And a resurrection, I already asked you about that earlier. Nobody said they've ever seen a resurrection, yet if you're a Christian, you've got to believe something none of us have ever seen. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? Can you actually believe in Jonah? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, Genesis 1:1, every other verse is at least possible. Here's the interesting thing. Even the atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. As I just mentioned, Hawking doesn't think it's God, but he's got no other explanation. So, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course. Can he do the Noah miracle? Yeah, of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't occur, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. Now, I just said something that you might not agree with. I said God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible if he can create the whole universe out of nothing. You may be thinking to yourself, what's this logically impossible stuff? I thought God can do anything. No, he can't. There are several things God can't do. He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. I know some guys try, but no. Okay? He can't create a five-sided triangle. Doesn't exist. He can't create an honest politician. Okay? There's some things that are just too hard for God. In fact, you can do some things that God can't do. What can you do? You could lie, right? You can cheat. If God were to do that, he wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the standard of truth. So when we say God is all-powerful, we don't mean he can do logically impossible things. I believe his nature is the standard of logic. He can't violate his own nature. If he could do those things, he'd go out of existence. He wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the standard. Now, I know some of you may be saying, well, look, Frank, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. Well, that's not a good reason necessarily to disbelieve something. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen those? No, but you use them all the time. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people being treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. You realize if there is no God, there is no justice? It's just someone's opinion against another opinion. And people that get away with murder here on earth are never going to get justice if there's no God. Did you know that? You've never seen love, and everybody believes in love. In fact, in the second debate I had with Christopher Hitchens, which is on our YouTube channel, you can see it, the CrossExamined YouTube channel. Christopher was a materialist, as you know, and some student from the College of New Jersey during the Q&A asked him this question. The student said, "Christopher, what is love?" And Christopher, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. What's a materialist? Somebody that believes that you're just a molecular machine. You don't have a mind, you just have a brain. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. You're nothing but a moist robot, according to the materialists. And most atheists today are materialists. So he had to come up with some sort of material answer for the question. So after he hemmed and hawed for a little while, he finally said to the student, "Love is a chemical." And I said to him, "Don't tell that to your wife." "Honey, do you love me?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have the chemical." All right? Love is not a chemical. Love is a decision to seek what's best for the other person according to God's will. It's an action to do what's best for the other person. It's not a chemical. It's not even a feeling. Love may be associated with feelings, but feelings aren't required for love. If feelings were required for love, you couldn't love your enemies. Right? And by the way, students, before you get married, don't get married on the basis alone of feelings. Because feelings come and feelings go. Feelings are not going to keep your relationship together. You have to make a decision to seek what's best for the other person, regardless of your feelings. In fact, you know when you meet somebody for the first time and you're all lovey-dovey and you've got that, you're kind of in that infatuation stage, all you can think about is the other person, you're waiting for the next text, the next phone call, you know, it's like, "Oh, I can't wait. People think that's love. And when that wears off, that you're not in love anymore. Who would want that feeling to last for more than just a few weeks, right? Imagine if that lasted 5 years. You'd be dead. You couldn't do anything else. That may be the spark that starts the relationship. It's not the engine that keeps it going. This is what C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity. In fact, why do you take a vow when you get married? You're not vowing to feel a certain way for the next 50 years. You know, you can't vow to feel a certain way. You might as well say, "I'll never be hungry or angry or lonely again." Those are feelings. You can't vow feelings. You can only vow action. And when you're all lovey-dovey, you don't need a vow, do you? You want to be with the other person. The reason you take a vow is because you know at some point the feelings are going to wear off. And you still have to love and should love the other person. You don't need a vow when you're lovey-dovey. You need a vow, 10 years into your marriage when you wake up and you go, "You again. Why did it have to be you again?" So don't buy into this idea that love is a feeling. It's not. It's grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen it, but you know what it is. You've never seen gravity. "Oh, there's gravity right there." No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. We really don't even know what gravity is. You've never seen George Washington. And yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a man who lived from 1732 to 1799. So, just because you haven't seen a miracle doesn't mean they don't occur. Do you realize that miracles don't have to occur today for Christianity to be true? There could be no miracles since Jesus and the apostles and Christianity would still be true. Now, I think there have been miracles since then, but they're not required. For atheism to be true, every single miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be false. Even demonic experiences. Is that possible? Well, it's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No. You got to have a lot of faith to be an atheist. And by the way, if miracles do occur today or at any time, you ought not expect to see many of them. Why? Because what's God's purpose for miracles? He does rare events at rare times to get our attention. The reason he's doing miracles in the Bible is to show us who we should listen to. Miracles are bunched around Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because God is authenticating them. Listen to these guys. They can do miracles. If miracles occurred all the time, they wouldn't get our attention as special acts of God. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Jesus mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. Right? No. It's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. This is where David Hume, you may have heard that name, skeptic back in the 1700s, tried to rule out miracles. This is what he gets wrong. He's punishing miracles because they're rare events. They have to be regular events to believe in them. If they're regular events, then they're not miracles. They have to be rare events, not regular events. And you know what? You know what's so amazing about life? That regular events occur all the time that are so spectacular that we know they're not miracles because they happen all the time, but we know there's intelligence behind them. In fact, how many people in this room have ever seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand. It's only the fathers I'm asking now. Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of you or another human being, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and now look at this. How did this happen? We don't call it a miracle because it happens every day, but if we stop and pause long enough, we go, wow, there's a mind behind this. In fact, biologist Ariel Roth put it this way. He said, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his own ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. In fact, just look at the person next to you for a second. How can that person even think and move and be conscious? People are amazing when you think about it because there's a mind behind all this, greater than our own. All right. Here's what Thomas Sowell said. When you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Why am I saying this? Because you know what we often do? We think love means approval. Love does not mean approval. And I can prove it to you. How many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? Okay, good. That's all of us then, right? Okay. Question. If your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13, would they have been loving parents? No. Parents need to stand in the way of evil if you're going to love somebody. If you approve of everything your 13-year-old wants to do, you're not loving, you're enabling them to do evil. And in our culture, there are people saying, if you love me, you'll approve of what I want to do, especially on the sexual issues. You're not loving them if you approve what they do. You know what you're doing? You're helping yourself. This is what Sowell is saying. The reason you don't tell them the truth is because you don't want them mad at you. And so you're not telling them what they need to hear. You're telling them what they want to hear. That's not love. You're enabling them because you're a coward. Sorry, I'm stepping on toes. I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't care. Okay? All right, so now let's move on to the final question. Is the New Testament true? We know that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible. But does the crowning miracle in the New Testament, the resurrection of Jesus, is the evidence good for that? Now, in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10 tonight. We only have time for 2, and I'm going to cover them briefly to show that I think the New Testament writers are telling the truth. And the first one I want to look at is something called embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? Historians know that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to make up things that make you look bad, right? You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't invent things to embarrass yourself. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't lie to make yourself look bad. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament documents, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New right now. The New Testament documents are filled with embarrassing stories and details that the writers never would have invented. That's why we call this the duh factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Jesus calls the leader of the disciples, Peter, Satan. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Peter, who wrote this down, said to, or Mark, who wrote this down, said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. That's embarrassing. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! And who are the brave ones? The women. That's right, the women. Ladies, you can give yourselves a hand. That's right. I didn't run away like you sissy pants men did. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down something like this. Let's say we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked them. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was. But independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making this whole story up, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of the women, was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a credible witness you got there, huh? I actually had a woman come up to me once and she said, hey, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that because, ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll be watching, you'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. You think that's bad. I was at the University of Cincinnati. Clint and I were about a year ago. And I had a guy come up to me after the presentation. He said, you think that's bad? He said, I know of a friend who was on a private plane, just he and the pilot died. And my friend didn't know how to land the plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. When he went home that night, his wife said, honey, how was your day? He said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know, at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 28, where Jesus takes his disciples up in Galilee on a hill and he gives them the Great Commission. You know, the Great Commission. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. There's a difference. Anyway, it says of the disciples there, as Jesus is giving them the Great Commission, it says in verse 17, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're doubting? How embarrassing is that? It's like they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah, that guy over there is Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, Jesus is dead. It's not him. It is. It can't be. Do you know what the Romans did to him? I mean, first of all, they whipped him. Then they put spikes through him. Then they put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. If the Romans didn't kill him, they could be killed for botching the execution. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. In Mark chapter 3, it says that his own family thought Jesus was out of his mind and wanted to seize him and take him home. That's embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. That's embarrassing. We learn later, however, that one of his brothers, James, his half-brother, dies as a martyr as the pastor of the church in Jerusalem in 62 AD. He's thrown off the Temple Mount by the Sanhedrin, and then he's stoned to death. There's no Bible book that tells us this. You know who tells us this? Josephus, the Jewish historian, who probably may have witnessed this. He was in Jerusalem at the time. He lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD. He tells us this. And another writer later, Hegesippus, tells us this. They tell us that James dies as a martyr for his own brother. But prior to that, prior to the resurrection, 30 years before that, James didn't think his brother was God. Now, why did he think his brother was God later? Well, because the earliest evidence for the resurrection in the entire Bible is a creed. This is a short statement that summarizes what happened to Jesus. It would be like, in today's day and age, a TikTok video, something really short that people could memorize. And it's 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8. And in that creed, it tells you who Jesus appeared to. And one of the people he appeared to was James. That must have convinced him. Before the resurrection, James said, yo, bro, you're not God. After the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did James until the resurrection. Also, Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. Do you think they invented this? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar, right? Now, do you think Matthew, when he was putting together the genealogy, said to himself, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in there, Rahab, Tamar. No, they're just telling the truth. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. What did Judah do? Judah sold his brother Joseph into slavery in Egypt, and he was the guy that slept with his daughter-in-law, Tamar, who was posing as a prostitute. Yet he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess it's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the text, in the genealogy, he doesn't mention her name. What does he say instead? Does anyone know? Huh? Yes, Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up his crime. This is embarrassing. You don't find this in other ancient genealogies. Ancient history, you'd never find this in Egypt. A pharaoh would chop the head off of his historian if his historian said, I'm going to put some prostitutes in your bloodline and a lot of it. No. In fact, Even today, we hide embarrassing details. I don't care who's in the White House. That press secretary is just a propagandist. Do you notice the press secretary can never admit anything the president has done wrong? Everything's always rosy. They spin, they spin, they spin. There's no spin in the Bible. You get all the embarrassing details, all the horrible sins. They just tell the truth. In fact, this is why Dennis Prager, you guys know who Dennis Prager is? Conservative Jewish radio host and has studied the Old Testament and written books on it. He's not a Christian, but he's Jewish, believes the Old Testament's true. Here's what he says. The main reason I know the Old Testament's true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history about themselves. I agree with Dennis, but I would say to Dennis, if embarrassing testimony works for the Old Testament, why doesn't it work for the New? We've got a lot of embarrassing testimony in the New as well. All right, one more reason to believe the New Testament writers are telling the truth, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these people who are in a position to know whether Jesus had risen from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. Here's a couple of things you need to remember about these people. All of the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Jews. Luke's the only Gentile. These people think they're part of God's chosen people. They already have a world religion that they believe in, or a religion they believe in. And suddenly, they believe a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. Those were two things their religion didn't think could happen, that a man could claim to be God and rise from the dead. That would be blasphemy. Yet they're believing that. In fact, it's really important to look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. And then suddenly Jesus comes along and they go, you know, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is right here. They get rid of their sacrificial system just like that. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, a trinity. 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, you can find the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much more pronounced in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul says, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Why? Because the Sabbath has arrived. Who's the Sabbath? Jesus. We rest in Jesus. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament as binding on Christians. There's only one that isn't. Which one? Keep holy the Sabbath, because the Sabbath has arrived. Now, this doesn't mean it's not a good idea to devote a day just to the Lord. I'm just saying it's not an obligation anymore. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, they believed in a sacrificial Messiah. Yes, Jesus would conquer when he comes again, but they didn't see the sacrificial Messiah the first time. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, let me just point out one other thing. If you were inventing a religion, would you pick this as your symbol? Who would pick circumcision? Hey, what am I going to do to join your religion? What? No thanks. I'm out. They're not making this up. Now, question. What would have caused these people to abandon everything on the left, all these sacred beliefs they had for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so impactful, so dramatic, that it can turn you around 180 degrees. Some impact events are so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there's probably only a few of you in this room that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up and hold it up high. Ladies and gentlemen, you see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yes, I'm 62 years old. I know, I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Okay. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm a toddler. I'm standing in our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I never saw my mother cry like that. That was the first time I saw her cry, and it was an impact event. I can still see her in my mind right now when she was 26 years old sitting on that ottoman. She's 86 now. But I can see her when she was 26. I don't remember anything before that, and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? For those of you who are old enough, I was in my office, in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me. I'd seen the first tower had been hit, but I didn't know by what. And I'm talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about what would the topic be when I came to his church to talk or to speak. What would it be? And so I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. And we're just talking, and then suddenly he screams into the phone, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, look at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no, it was a passenger plane. It was like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said, it was just on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone, and for some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said this: one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You dimwit. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? I mean, do you think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was over 23 years ago. And those of you who are old enough, if I were to ask you where you were, you would know something about that day. But if I asked you where you were 23 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know. Let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? Who knows? Why can you remember something from 23 years ago but not 23 days ago? No impact event 23 years ago. Impact event 23 days ago. 23 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what happened? Or had any trouble trying to remember what he did and said? Because after all, then he did miracles for 40 days, right? You wouldn't have any ability probably to forget it. It would be so ingrained in your memory. That's the only way I could figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right overnight under the threat of death. In fact, think about this. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? What did they get? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? Hey, we're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? Well, first we get kicked out of the synagogue, then we'll get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question, and maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers out there that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. They're all in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but we don't have time to get into that now. I just want to point out that people who often ask that question often have an illicit assumption under the question. You know what the illicit assumption is? You really can't trust these New Testament writers because, you see, they were biased. They were believers. You can only trust the non-Christian writers to tell us really what happened. Now, if you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how silly that is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. If I'm going to believe anyone, it's going to be the people that put their lives on the line to say it was true. In fact, some of you may know my friend, J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. And Jim is also a Christian, and he's used his detective skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. His book is called Cold Case Christianity. He has a website, coldcasechristianity.com, but well worth checking out. In any event, Jim says that whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 motivations or possible motivations for why that guy was murdered. That guy was murdered for one or more of these 3 reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those 3 things can drive people to murder. In fact, those are the same 3 things that can drive any of us to do evil. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. So what Jim says, he says, if you're going to say these New Testament writers invented all this, you got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. So let's look at the New Testament writers and see if they have any of these motivators. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he persecuted the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motivation to make this up. In fact, why would they then go die for a known lie? Now, at this point, you might say, wait a minute, Frank. If you're going to say that martyrdom is somehow evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say that martyrdom is somehow evidence for Islam? Because they have martyrs. And the answer is no. Why? Well, there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. Muhammad himself in the Quran said he didn't do miracles. All he did is he warned people there was one God. So the Muslims today and the Muslims in 1,400 years ago, they didn't witness any miracles that told them that Islam was true. But the New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed the risen Jesus. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, one last thing I'm going to say about this, and for those of you that believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God like I do, this is going to sound like heresy, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents that we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they didn't read about this in a book. They witnessed the resurrected Jesus themselves. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Then they wrote it down. In other words, Christianity did not begin with a book. Christianity began with an event, the resurrection of Jesus. There would be no documents written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. Because they had every motivation to say it didn't happen, not every motive to say it did. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't even have these documents. written in the first century by Jews unless this happened. Look, either they invented it or it's true. I don't think they could be mistaken. It's easy to disprove Christianity. You could just find Jesus' body, and that would have alleviated any mistake they made, and there were too many people who wanted to debunk Christianity. Look, they either invented it or it was true. What motivation did they have to invent this? Every motivation to say it was false, and they still said it was true and paid with their lives. Now, there's a lot more evidence. We don't have time to go into it. Here's the overall argument. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument. This is known as review. First argument, cosmological. Second argument, teleological. Third argument, moral. From those three arguments, we know there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Oh, they left. Okay. Are miracles possible? Yes. What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. In fact, if somebody says they don't believe in miracles, you ought to say to them, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. And if miracles are possible, is it possible that God rose Jesus from the dead? Yeah, and the evidence shows that he was risen from the dead. So, if you want to go further in this, first of all, I brought some books and some DVDs, and I want to point out all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know, I need some help. I've got some kids, all right? Anyway, the book, first of all, take out your phone and follow this QR code if you want the entire PowerPoint presentation, because I'm going to send it to you in a PDF format. I showed you maybe 50 slides today. There's actually, the whole presentation has 362. Okay, so I'm cutting out a lot. And I'm going to send you about 11 other presentations for free as well, including the one we did last night at the high school not far from here. If that doesn't work, you can just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. And the folks watching online can do the same thing. Text evidence to 855-909-0582. We have a few copies of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, the book. We also have a DVD set I don't have up here, but the DVD set is me presenting this information in a DVD form. It's about 7 hours long, including Q&A, and you can get workbooks and teacher workbooks and curricula at our website if you want to take people through this. Also, this book, Correct Not Politically Correct, we have only one left, so someone will get that. That's a book that deals with transgenderism and same-sex marriage. That book is not, there's no Bible verses in it. That book is the natural law common sense case why same-sex marriage and transgenderism are not good for individuals and they're not good for societies. You could give that book to an unbeliever. All right? So, it's true. So what? So what if Christianity's true? Well, the best news of all, somebody actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, which, by the way, stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs earn. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. 5, maybe 10%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that died for them, the one that sacrificed for them, the one that saved them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, don't put your identity in your Savior. Put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your gender preference, or your sexual preference, or put your identity in your job, or your bank account, or another person. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize all those identities are extremely fragile, and you can lose any of them at any moment? For example, if you put your identity in your sexual preference, what happens when you can no longer sexually perform, or you're no longer sexually preferred? You no longer have an identity. If you put your identity in your job, what happens when you lose your job? You no longer have an identity. If you put your identity in another person, what happens when, God forbid, that person leaves you or dies? You no longer have an identity? No, your identity is not based on temporal things here on earth. Your identity can be received from your Savior. Do you realize that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity? If you've got to achieve it, well, man, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. And when you can't do it anymore, you no longer have an identity. You don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. This is why the biographer known as John wrote, he's given you the right to become a child of God. You receive him. And once you receive Jesus, then you're an heir to the throne. You're adopted into the family. It's eternal. You can't lose it. It's a secure identity. In fact, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection is true. Who cares what your sexual preference is? Is it going to last forever? No, it's not. Who cares how much money you have? Read Ecclesiastes. Solomon's just going to say you're going to leave it to somebody else. What purpose of that? What's the purpose in that? Who cares what you build? It's going to crumble. Who cares how many likes you get on Instagram? All it does is it makes other people envious of you. And you're envious of them when they get more likes than you. Who cares? It's not going to save you. Only a Savior can save you. And when you accept that free gift, when you receive what he went through hell to provide, then you have an identity you were meant to have. Father, I pray if there's someone here who's never accepted, never received the free gift that you provide, that tonight would be the night. It's eternal, it's secure, and it's true. Amen. All right, friends, let's go to Q&A. And before we go to Q&A, we don't want this event tonight just to be an event. We want people here who want to go further into this kind of material to have a way to do it here on the campus. And there's a couple of organizations that do that. One is headed by Andy right here. Andy, tell folks, do we have a mic for Andy? Can he use that mic right there? Tell folks where Chi Alpha meets, what time, when, so people can join the group if they want to.
We have a large group meetings every Thursday night, 7 p.m. in the Lucas Engineering Building by the quad. And then we have a lot of Bible study groups that meet at various locations all throughout campus.
All right, and you got a group of about 50 or 60 right now, right? Okay, good. So if you want to go further, not just in this, but in the Christian life in general, check out Chi Alpha. When is it again? Thursday at?
Thursday, 7 p.m.
At?
The Lucas Engineering Building.
Lucas Engineering Building. Where's Dean? Dean, why don't you tell them about BSM too? By the way, these folks have helped put this on, so.
I'm Darren Ford. I'm the director of the Baptist Student Ministry. We are right behind the dining hall, right next to Gentry Dorm. We have Bible study on Tuesday night. We call Connect. We have free lunch on Wednesdays, and free is a very good price. And we have men's and women's Bible study and freshman Bible study all together on Monday nights. So those are all student-led, and our large group is on Tuesday night, free lunch on Wednesday.
All right, thank you so much. All right, friends. Now, no one likes to ask the first question, so let's move right on to the second question. All right? And you got to come up to the microphone, because if you don't, nobody on the internet will hear you. So sorry, it's got to be. If you don't want to be on the internet, don't ask a question. But we'll start right here with this gentleman. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Noah Sorry.
Hey, Noah. Do you want him a little closer, Clint? Yeah, that's
short
probably.
king,
Yeah, you're
so-
good. You're good. Go
Okay.
ahead, Noah.
I wanted to ask, you said that the apostles died for their faith, or were willing to die for their faith. Apostles is kind of a nebulous term, so I was going to go by what Sean McDowell, who
Yes.
wrote his doctoral thesis on
Yes.
the apostle martyrdom, and so he said the 11 original disciples, minus Judas, of course,
Right.
plus Paul would
Yep.
be the apostles.
Right.
And he says that we can only say with like relative certainty that 4 of them died, and only
Yep.
2 of them with like accurate certainty. So I was just curious.
Yeah, I agree with Sean. Sean
Yeah.
did some great work on that. I think Christians overstate the case when they try and say all 11 died. That's probably true, but we can't confirm
Well,
all
John
of them.
didn't die.
What's that?
John didn't die for sure.
Right,
Because
right,
he was
right.
exiled,
Yeah,
but
10 out of the 11. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
11 out of the 12 if you include Paul,
Yeah.
right? Okay. But Sean McDowell, who did his PhD research on this, his dissertation said we have really good evidence from the first century for Peter, Paul, and 2 Jameses.
Well, James and the 2 James, James the son of Zebedee and James the brother of Jesus, are
Right.
like a notch lower. They're not on the same level as Peter and Paul.
Okay, right, but there's
Yeah.
still good evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I don't think that the evidence is as good for those 2, the 2 Jameses. And so I feel like it's easier to justify why 2 people would die for something they genuinely believe in, whereas the other, and as opposed to like a lot more than that. So I was just curious.
Well,
like,
you got to evaluate the evidence for yourself, but what we do know from the ancient world is there is no evidence that anyone ever recanted. And you would
Well-
think if this was invented, people would be giving up, giving the thing up all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was invented, but I was more curious just because, like, we don't necessarily know if they had the opportunity to recant either.
Well, they were persecuted in general, right? It wasn't just to the death,
I mean,
right? In fact, if you notice, most of the New Testament documents are writing about suffering.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I think, but there were also time periods later on where, like, the persecution went down and, like, went up and stuff. It wasn't, like, constant persecution.
Right, it's true, but they could have voted with their feet, right?
True, yeah.
They could have just walked away from the persecution, and
Yeah.
they didn't.
Yes.
Yeah.
But-
So, yeah, I think the case can be overstated,
Yes.
but you can also understate it, which I think what skeptics often do. And again, I would ask them, there's 2 possibilities here. This really happened, or it was invented. I think you have to have a lot more faith to believe it was invented than
Well,
to believe it really
I
happened.
mean, I don't necessarily know that it was either invented or...
What's the other option?
I would say people were mistaken, because...
How could they be mistaken about a bodily resurrection where the tomb was known and any production of a body would have squashed the whole thing?
I mean, was the tomb known, though? Because that's not one of, like, Gary Habermas's minimal facts.
Well, Gary will say that at least 75% of scholars admit the empty tomb, okay?
Yes.
But if anybody started to claim that Jesus had resurrected from the dead, and that creed in 1 Corinthians 15, even Bart Ehrman agrees is within 2 years of the event.
Yeah.
Anybody who wanted to squash Christianity, they could have pulled a skeleton out of that tomb and not even known it was Jesus, and it would have ended Christianity.
But if we didn't know that it was a tomb, like if he was put in a mass grave, then finding a skeleton in a mass
Why
grave
think he's
wouldn't-
put in a mass grave?
I just think that that makes the most sense out of the 3 options that we have for what would happen to a crucifixion victim. Or I guess 4 options, my bad.
Why would you think that? There's no evidence that that's the case. Where does the evidence come from?
So, like, obviously his family wouldn't take him because they weren't in high order. And then all we know from the creed is that Jesus was buried. We don't know where he was buried.
Right, but the other testimony we have is that Joseph of Arimathea took him to a tomb that had never been used before, and when they did the excavations under the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that's the kind of tomb they found.
Well, I don't think that the evidence for Joseph of Arimathea is that strong because I think that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, my bad. Man. I totally just blanked on what I was going to say. Joseph of Arimathea is part of the word of the Jewish leader people.
Yeah,
he's a Sanhedrin.
He's a member of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, and
which, by the way, is another embarrassing detail. Why would anybody inventing this story say that a guy who sentenced Jesus to die turned out to be a good guy, while the disciples who followed Jesus ran away?
Well, because I think people were trying to establish that there was an empty tomb, so you would have to figure out how he got into a tomb.
But why would they want to establish an empty tomb? To get themselves beaten, tortured, and killed?
Well, because they wanted to be able to prove that Jesus was resurrected.
Why?
Because they wanted to continue the belief.
Why?
I don't know. Why not?
Look, man, you can say anything. You can say that aliens came down and took the body. You can say anything, but a possibility is not evidence.
Yes.
You need evidence for what you say, and all the evidence is on the side that Jesus rose from the dead. You can speculate any way you want, and you can believe that.
Yeah.
But if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
So I was thinking about this while you were talking.
It's yes or no.
Well, so my thing is, like,
No.
you
Okay,
believe
got
that you believe Christianity is
got
true.
it. Go ahead.
You believe that Christianity is true, and so for me, like, if Christianity is true in the way that it's true for you, then probably not, because I'm not. But if it was true
Wait,
to
true,
me,
what do you mean true for me? What does that mean?
well, like, you believe it because you see evidence and
Yeah.
you evaluate that evidence and you think that it's true. So if I evaluated the evidence and believed that it was true, then I would believe it. Is my point. I would say yes. I'll just simplify it. Yes, I would. If it was true,
Okay, so if I gave you a book, would you read it?
probably yes.
No, not probably.
Yes, I would read it. I have a long reading list, but I would eventually get to it. I promise.
Give him a book, would you? Thank you. Hey, by the way, I'm glad you're reading Gary Habermas.
Yes.
Read Gary. You know he's got his new magnum opus?
I haven't gotten it yet, but I plan to.
Yeah, get it in Kindle. It's a lot cheaper.
Okay.
Okay? All right.
I have Evidence Demands a Verdict. I'm reading through that one right now.
Okay.
So I'm like halfway through.
All right, good. Thank you. All right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
I'm Eric.
Eric, go ahead.
So back on the topic of like the head issue and the heart issue.
Uh-huh.
You know, we talk about like the evidence. So how would you go about addressing the heart issue? Like, you know, say somebody says, you know, if Christianity is real, would I believe it? And they say no. How would you continue that?
I'd give him a book, just like I did.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. my brother's the heart issue person. So.
Okay, when somebody's not interested, first of all, I think you ought to realize you shouldn't expect people to agree with you. Because people will say to me, Frank, you know, you answer a lot of questions, and sometimes it hasn't happened lately, but sometimes people are rude to you. Why don't you get mad at them? And the reason I don't get mad at them is why should I expect, say, a 22-year-old person to agree with me at 62? When I was 22, I didn't agree with my 62-year-old self, right? Why should we expect anyone to agree with us right now? People are on a journey. Some are getting closer to Jesus, others are getting further away, and so we have to be patient. You and I and all the people in the room were different, say, 10 years ago, right, in our journey. So we got to give people grace and go, okay, I get it. But if you ask them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Or maybe better put, if Jesus really rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? And they say no, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. So what can you do with that? I think you can do at least 4 things, maybe more. First thing you can do is pray. You should always pray. Second thing you can do is love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do, as we mentioned earlier. Third thing you can do is plant seeds every now and then. Seeds that show them that their worldview is false and Christianity is true. You can't do that too much. They'll get annoyed, right? But every once in a while. The fourth thing you can do is wait. Why wait? For the same reason I just said a minute ago, not everybody is where you are right now. Something maybe needs to happen in their life before they're interested. Often that occurs when tragedy happens, right? Sometimes you only look up when you're on your back. Now, if that happens to the person that you've been loving and planting seeds and praying for, your phone's going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end. They're not going to call their atheist friend when tragedy strikes. What's the atheist friend going to say? Well, there's no rhyme or reason to the universe. This stuff just happens. Get over it. No. They're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, the student will summon the teacher. In fact, let me ask a quick survey here. How many people in this room who are Christians came to Christ at least partially through pain and suffering? Can I see your hands, please? Whoa. All All right, that's probably 40% of us. How many people who are Christians got closer to Jesus through pain and suffering? That's like everybody who's a Christian, yes. Okay? So, don't get all frustrated. Just pray, plant seeds, love them, and then wait.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Don.
Don, go ahead, sir.
First off, thank you for everything you're doing. When somebody comes up to you and asks you, and I've heard different things on this, but they ask you, if God's all good, He created everything. So where did evil come up in that plan? What would you say?
Okay, evil is not a thing in itself. Evil wasn't created because evil's not a thing. Evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body, right? What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing, right? Okay? Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. You got nothing, right? It doesn't exist on its own. So evil, God didn't create evil. God created the possibility for evil by giving us free will, but God didn't create evil because evil's not a thing in itself. Evil is a lack in a good thing. You could also think of evil as kind of anti-creation. God creates, and then we degrade the creation by sinning or hurting other people, right? We're degrading the creation. That's what evil is. But it's not a physical thing. It's not something God creates. He just creates the possibility of it. And the reason He did that is to give us the possibility of love, so we could love one another. I mean, God could have created a universe full of robots where there was no good or evil, but then there wouldn't be any love either. And God created us in His image because God has the capacity to love, so He wanted to give us the capacity to.
Gotcha. Makes
Make sense?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, I'm Nathan.
Say again?
Nathan.
Nathan, go ahead.
You mentioned that, love isn't always popular and doesn't always feel good. And as in many times in the past, we're in a day and age when speaking out for Christ can carry a lot of consequences.
Say a little louder if you could, Nathan.
We're in a day and time, when speaking out for Christ can carry a lot of consequences.
Yes.
You mentioned speaking with boldness. Where does that boldness come from? How and when do you know when to speak up?
That's a great question, and isn't it interesting if you read the Proverbs, there's two Proverbs right next to one another. One says, answer a fool according to his folly, and the next one says, don't answer a fool according to his folly. And you're going, what are you supposed to do? Exactly. You've got to figure it out, right? Is this person going to be moved toward Jesus or away from their existing worldview by interacting with them, or is that just going to drive them further away? Jesus said, right after He says, judge not lest you be judged, He says, don't cast your pearls before swine because they may turn on you and devour you. You've got to make the judgment as to whether or not it's worth trying to have an interaction with somebody, and that takes wisdom. Sometimes you should say something, other times you should not. And that's the reason I think asking questions is important. In fact, those 4 things I just mentioned you can do when somebody who's not interested. I said that you should pray, that you should love them, that you should plant seeds, and that you should wait. There's one other thing you can do, and that is ask a lot of questions. Because asking questions is not normally offensive. Making statements might be, but asking questions. So you might ask questions, well, why do you think that's true? Or why do you think all religions lead to God? Or why do you think the Bible has been corrupted? Or why do you think it's wrong to say, to prohibit abortion? Or whatever the issue is. Ask them for why they believe what they believe, rather than trying to say, here's what I believe and you ought to believe it. Get them to try and defend their position. Because when somebody believes something, it's not your job to refute what they say, it's their job to support what they say. So ask a lot of questions. I think that might be the way forward. In fact, my friend Greg Kokel has a great little book called Tactics. I don't know if you've seen it, but it helps you converse with people. And Greg says there are 3 major questions you always have to have ready to go. when somebody says something, like suppose someone were to say, I can't believe the Bible because it's been changed throughout the centuries. You probably heard that, right? You should ask 3 questions. The first question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's been changed throughout the centuries? Because chances are they don't even know what they mean, right? The second question to ask is, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what evidence do you have for that position? I can almost guarantee you, when you ask for evidence, they're not going to have it. In fact, if you want to customize what do you mean by that, or how did you come to that conclusion for that question, you can say, how did you come to that conclusion? Have you investigated the manuscript evidence for yourself? I can almost guarantee you the person isn't going to say, well, yeah, just last night I was up reading a book about the Byzantine line of manuscripts, right? Like, nobody's going to say that, right? What people believe largely in America today, they believe in slogans. They have all these slogans. They put them together in what they think is a coherent worldview, not knowing whether the slogans are really true or not, and not realizing that even if they were true, they'd be mutually contradictory. And so you need to call them on the evidence for the slogan. Oh, the Bible's been changed throughout the centuries. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have for that? They're not going to have it. Then you can say, with the third question, after what do you mean by that and how'd you come to that conclusion, you can say, have you ever considered, and then add some evidence back. Like, have you ever considered, we didn't get the Bible like the telephone game that you might be thinking of, you know, where one person heard it and passed it all around the room and it got all garbled. That's not how we got the Bible. We got the Bible because people who were there, or people who knew other people who were there, wrote down what happened, and then we've been able to copy those manuscripts over and over again, and by comparing the copies, we can reconstruct the original with more than 99% accuracy. Okay? So this is a good way for you to provide some evidence back. But always ask questions first. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, these questions you can use for any issue, not just Christianity, like parents. Suppose you get a call from your son in the middle of, late one night. He says, Dad, I'm not going to be home by 11 like you wanted me to. Don't panic. First question, what do you mean by that? Second question, how'd you come to that conclusion? Okay. Third question, have you ever considered if you're not home by 11, you're grounded for 2 weeks? Be right home, Dad. By the way, husbands, never use these questions on your wives. Okay? Because if she calls you an idiot, don't say, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? My wife will have a list 39 years long, all right? But remember those questions. They're in the book Tactics. They're also in our app, the CrossExamined app, 2 words in the App Store, CrossExamined. Download the app because there's a quick answer section in that answers common objections. So you might be having lunch with somebody, they say something, you don't know how to answer it, you go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? Right? You've got a question right there. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Zach.
Zach, go ahead.
Hi. So I am a Christ follower. I believe in the young earth, obviously, and creationism, all that. But I know a big point of contention typically revolves around like carbon dating and evolution. I've heard some pretty good arguments in favor of Christianity and creationism. But what are your, points usually that you would say to that?
Age of the earth?
Yeah, like the age of the earth, or more so like when somebody's trying to say, well, evolution's true because we have carbon dating. What would you sort of discuss?
I'm absolutely convinced the universe is at least 62 years old.
Yeah.
All right, I throw my mom in there, it's at least 86. All right? Actually, I think the evidence is better the universe is old. Okay? It's a perfectly legitimate interpretation of Genesis 1 to think that it's young, but I don't think it's necessary. Why? What does the first verse of the Bible say?
In the beginning.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, when did God create the heavens and the earth? Does it say when the beginning was? No. What's the next verse say? And the earth was formless and void. Wait. We've gone from the heavens and the earth, which there wasn't a Hebrew word for universe. Heavens and the earth meant the whole universe. We have the whole universe created in verse 1. The next verse, suddenly we're talking about the earth. How long did that take? Does it say? Doesn't say. You say, what about the days? The days don't begin till verse 3. If you want to take a hyper-literal view of Genesis, the heavens and the earth are created before the days ever begin. Okay? Now, John Lennox has written a book called 7 Days That Divide the World. You ought to read that book if you're interested in this topic, okay? But there's one other insight that I think is important to think about. When you're reading the Bible, you need to remember that the Bible was not written to you. The Bible was written for you. Who was Genesis 1 written to? Who was it written to? The Israelites who were just wandering in the desert. They're wandering in the desert over 40 years. They just came out of 400 years of slavery in Egypt. When they're walking through the desert, they're not asking the questions we're asking in the 21st century, right? They're not walking through the desert going, I wonder how old this place is. You know, that's not their question. Their question is Yahweh the true God or are the gods of Egypt the true God? And many scholars now are saying that Genesis 1 is a polemic against the Egyptian creation stories. What's a polemic? A correction. And if you look at the Egyptian creation stories, there are these pre-existing gods inside the universe. They're sort of like superheroes. They're not outside the universe, they're inside the universe, and they have to fight one another to bring order to chaos. Moses comes along and he says, that's not the way it happened. Yahweh is outside the universe. He doesn't have to fight anybody. He just speaks and brings order to chaos. So it seems Genesis 1 is a polemic against the Egyptian gods. It's not there to tell you how old the universe is. All right? Mm-hmm. Is it, could you interpret? You could interpret it that way, but I don't think it's necessary. And that's what John Lennox also points out in the book, 7 Days That Divide the World. In fact, Lennox will say the Bible leaves the age of the universe indeterminate. All right?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
All right, good question. Thanks, Zach. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Fernando.
Fernando, go ahead.
My question is, what do you should the Bible be spoken more in schools, like high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, and should because recently I think the state of Oklahoma have passed I believe a law that the Ten Commandments should be shown in all classrooms. What is your opinion on that?
Well, our country has the Ten Commandments over the head of the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court. Moses is looking at the Speaker of the House when he's up there on his podium there in the House of Representatives. This was not considered an establishment of religion by our founding fathers. It's just acknowledging our heritage. And think about this, ladies and gentlemen. The guy who put together the great book series, his name was Mortimer Adler. And when he put together the greatest book series, somebody asked him the question, why is the God section of the great book series bigger than almost any other section? And Adler said this, probably because there are more implications that flow from the answer to the question, does God exist, than any other question. If God exists, there's a purpose to life, a meaning to life, and a right way to live life. If God doesn't exist, there is no purpose to life, there is no meaning to life, there is no right way to live life. Here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know what our education system assumes? That the answer to that question is no. There is no God. If there is no God, there's no meaning or purpose to life. Is it any wonder that young people feel lost and anxious and are wondering, what is the meaning and purpose to life? In fact, the Bible unquestionably is the most influential book in human history. In fact, it's not a book, it's a library of books. And if we don't even look at it and even read it as literature, we're doing a great disservice in the education of our children. I think they should at least know what's in the Bible. And they probably should know something about the Quran, too. It's a great world religion. You should know something about it. So I think, at the very least, there ought to be some courses, at least to look at these great books, because people need to know about these books that have influenced the world so much. They can decide whether or not they think they're true or not. That's up to them. You can't force people to believe something's true. All you can do is provide them with the evidence and let them make up their own minds. But yes, this should be, I think, in our school system. Tragically, it is not. In fact, our country, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, was founded on theism. We hold these truths to be that all men were created and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Our country assumes theism. If you don't want theism, you can go to another country, okay? But we assume there's a God who gives us these rights. And look, at least we ought to be teaching the Declaration of Independence in schools, right? What, is the Declaration of Independence unconstitutional? Of course not. So there you go, Fernando.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. All right. Hey, what's your name?
Matthew.
Matthew, go ahead.
Are we infinite or finite beings?
Well, finite means limited, so yeah, we're limited beings. I mean, I guess I'd ask you, what do you mean by infinite? So, what's your definition of infinite?
In terms of time. So, for instance,
are we eternal beings?
Yes.
Okay, no, God is the only eternal being. We had a beginning, and we will have no end. But God had no beginning and no end. He's the great I am. God is eternity. We have eternity, right? We had a beginning. So while we will live forever, whether we believe in Jesus or not, the only question is where you're going to live. While we live forever, we had a beginning. God had no beginning.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, that was easy. Hi, what's your name?
Hello, my name's Grace.
Grace, go ahead. That's the whole point of the Bible right there. Did you hear that? Grace. Grace is the whole point of the Bible. Go ahead, Grace.
Okay, so I had a friend who left early, so she texted me her question. It says,
oh, asking for a friend.
I know.
Okay, Grace.
Really, it really is. Okay,
go ahead.
It says, does God exist out of time, or did he create time and choose to be bound by it? Essentially, A theory or B theory?
Oh, great. Question about A theory or B theory of time. First of all, you got to distinguish between the A theory and the B theory of time. The A theory is the theory that the common sense view of time. There's a past, present, and future and all this. And, we transition through that. The B theory is that there is none of this transition. It's almost like one eternal now, if I understand it correctly. And I don't see any reason to believe that. God is outside of time. Yeah. So when he looks down at the whole timeline, he knows the end from the beginning. That's how he can do predictive prophecy, and he knows what we're going to do. But no, I think that I don't have any reason to accept the B theory. I have no reason to. So I think the A theory makes sense. But God is outside of time, and that's why when he sees everything going on all at once, because he has knowledge. I mean, he is knowledge. We have knowledge. He knows the end from the beginning.
Thank you.
All right. Great. Thanks. By the way, a friend of mine puts the entire Bible this way. Think about this. God created it. We broke it. Jesus fixed it. God created it. We broke it. Jesus fixed it. And the means by which Jesus fixed it? Grace. Right? He gives us grace because he came to earth and took our punishment upon himself. And you simply accept what he's done rather than work for it. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You said you believe in...
what's your name?
Oh, my name's Hayden.
Hayden, go ahead.
You said you believe in an old earth
and
that the Bible doesn't really prescribe a certain age of the earth. Mm-hmm. So I would just want to know how you kind of knit together the idea of old earth, the Genesis account, perhaps even evolution. Is there a historical Adam, whatnot?
Of course I believe in a historical Adam. And I think God created Adam out of the dust, just like it says. It makes a lot more sense than natural laws did it, right? So yes, God created Adam out of the dust. When that happened, I don't know. What was the other part of the question?
How does creation and evolution play into the Genesis
Well,
account?
first of all,
Or
I think macroevolution is false on the merits, not because the Bible. Leave the Bible out of it for a minute. When you look at the evidence for macroevolution, I not only think the evidence is weak for macroevolution, there's very strong evidence against it. Okay? I'll just give you a few real quickly with the acronym LIFE, L-I-F-E. L stands for the fact that there's a limited capacity for change. Like, for example, dog breeders try and breed dogs, right? And they get a dog as small as a Chihuahua and as large as a Great Dane. But even with all their intelligence, they can't break the genus of dogs. Why do we think a non-intelligent process can break that genus, can break those limits? Doesn't make any sense, right? The I stands for irreducible complexity. And Michael Behe introduced this back in 1996 with his book, Darwin's Black Box, where he points out that there are so many aspects of living things that you can't build gradually, that they're irreducibly complex, that all the pieces and all the parts have to be in place in working order to have any function at all. You can't get there gradually. Like you can't get, Richard Dawkins talked about, well, maybe our eyes were developed through some sort of gradual process where we had at first sort of light-sensitive cells and then they eventually evolved into an eye. What Dawkins doesn't seem to realize is that light-sensitive cells are irreducibly complex themselves, and that to get to an eye, light-sensitive cells aren't a prerequisite to an eye. And you'd have to have vision the whole way through with all the parts there at the same time. So it doesn't work. The F stands for the fact that the fossil record does not comport with macroevolution. It comports with instantaneous creation because according to their dating, the Cambrian explosion, where most major body phyla or body plans appear, they appear in the geological record about 530 million years ago in a geological instant. It looks more like creation rather than this long series of gradual fossils that we should find if macroevolution were true. This is a great problem for Darwin. He said, if my theory is true, why isn't the geological strata filled with all these intermediate fossils? He said, but don't worry, we'll investigate it and I'll be vindicated. Well, for the past 160 years, we've been investigating the fossil record, and Darwin isn't vindicated. Okay? There are huge gaps in the fossil record. And E stands for something known as epigenetic information. And that is the idea that there's structures in the cell that are required for life and for the cell to function that can't be modified by mutating DNA. And you can't modify epigenetic information by mutating it. In other words, maybe an analogy would be if you have a software program in your computer, say an architecture program, to build a house, you can come up with a plan to build the house, but is the architecture program going to give you the nails, the wood, the lumber, the concrete to build the house? No, the architecture program is like DNA. It's the software. The hardware of a living thing is called epigenetic information, and in order to get a new body plan, you need to modify epigenetic information. The problem is if you try and modify epigenetic information early on in the embryonic process, the living thing dies. It's lethal. So this is why on November 7th, 2016, in London, the Royal Society called together a meeting, and the premise of the meeting was the Darwinian theory of evolution doesn't work. We need to find a new theory. So they all met there in 2016. They pointed out several problems with neo-Darwinian theory, and they didn't come up with a new theory because there isn't one. Okay? So not only is the evidence for macroevolution weak, in my opinion, there's evidence against it, and I just gave you 4. I could go on. Okay? So I don't think it works. But look, let's suppose macroevolution is true. Does that mean there's no God?
No.
Does that mean Jesus didn't rise from the dead?
No.
No. So even if it's true, it doesn't defeat Christianity. I just don't think it's true based on the merits. And if macroevolution is true, the natural laws that drive it are still created by a lawgiver who created these laws and sustains them. So you're not getting rid of God even if it's true.
So would you say, sorry to keep going, but would you say that just the world probably developed for a few million years and then God just put Adam in just a random set of time?
Well, it wasn't random according to God.
No, of course.
I don't know when Adam came into existence. There's all sorts of different theories. William Lane Craig has a theory. He wrote a book called The Historical Adam, which I haven't read yet, so I can't recommend it. I don't know. There's a Four Views book on the historical Adam that's coming out. William Lane Craig is a contributor to it. I just got an email that it's coming out, but I haven't seen it yet because it's not out yet. So there's a lot of different views. And whichever side you come down on, it doesn't defeat Christianity.
Amen.
All right? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Christian.
Hey, Christian.
I am a follower of Jesus, like the name
Good.
suggests.
We got Christian and Grace. Good. All right.
So there's a lot of students on this campus that are international students. A lot of them actually aren't atheists, but they're actually like Hindus or Muslims, something like that. I recently learned that there are English-speaking Muslim apologists that are Muslims that argue for the existence of Islam based on, like, essentially saying the Quran came last, it says things about Jesus and Moses, and so either they say they're universalists, like we believe Jews and Christians are also going to be just okay, or they're Muslims, like truly pious Muslims that say like the Quran proves itself by referencing the other books, essentially. So my question is, have you ever spent time either, you know, debating them, or have you ever yourself found it valuable to like look into their arguments?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And in fact,
what did you find? Yeah.
I think there's a few guys on the internet that do really good work in witnessing to Muslims. One is David Wood.
Okay.
And if you look at Apologetics Roadshow, his YouTube channel, you'll find him. Another is Sam Shimon, who does really good work as well. And Sam told me the best book to use in discussing this with Muslims is a book my co-author wrote, Norman Geisler, with a Muslim who converted to Christianity. The book is called Answering Islam. Answering Islam. So check that book out, Christian. It's a very good book. Here's one issue with Islam that I think you can bring up. The Quran says that Christians and Jews ought to obey the Old Testament and the Gospels.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
It says that in several places. I want to say it's Surah 568 is one place it says this. This is the 5th chapter, verse 68. Here's the problem. Elsewhere in the Quran, like the chapter before, Surah 4, verse 137 or 157 maybe, it says that Jesus never died, was taken straight to heaven, so he couldn't have resurrected from the dead.
I recently heard that, yeah.
Yeah. This is called the Quranic dilemma. Why is it a dilemma? Because if the Quran in chapter 5 is saying obey the Bible, the New Testament, but the Quran in chapter 4 is disagreeing with the New Testament, there's a bit of a dilemma here, right?
Right.
Either way, the Quran can't be the Word of God. Here's why. If they're right about Surah 4, that Jesus never died, then Christianity's false, but so is Islam. Why? Because the next chapter says you ought to obey what the New Testament says. So this is called the Quranic dilemma, and I would bring this up to a Muslim.
Thank you.
Okay, make sense? All right, thanks. And by the way, David Wood's website, YouTube channel, has a YouTube video that explains this much better than I can. It's called The Quranic Dilemma. It's animated. It's about 7 minutes long. Check that out, all right? Thank you. Yes, sir.
How you doing, sir?
Hey, what's your name?
My name's Zach.
Zach, go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. How you doing?
I'm fine.
All right.
Except I'm tired, but go ahead.
So my mom is a converted Messianic Jew. She converted from Judaism, or she converted from Christianity back
to
when
Judaism.
To Messianic Judaism.
Okay, all right.
So from what I've learned from her and my stepdad, who's practicing to become a rabbi,
A Messianic rabbi?
A Messianic rabbi,
So
yes.
he's a Christian. Okay,
Yes.
okay, go ahead.
So I'm sorry. It's hard for me to talk and I'm nervous.
No, go ahead, man. Take your time.
So they say that we say the whole Bible, the entire Bible is the Word of God, but they say that the Torah is the Word of God, obviously. But they say only the first 5 books of the Bible are the Word of God because Moses is the only author that was actually face to face with God, whereas all these others were just words from God, and you know what I'm saying.
All right, so the reason I believe the entire Old Testament is the Word of God is because Jesus did. And if Jesus rose from the dead, if he predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then he's God. And whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught that the entire Old Testament is the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. So I'm taking the entire Old Testament on the authority of Jesus.
Now I'm asking this in a genuine question. Did Jesus believe that that the entire Old Testament was the Word of God, or did Jesus believe that that those were the rest of the Old Testament was just like rabbinic teachings?
No, he believed that the entire Old Testament was the Word of God, and so did his apostles, because they quoted from the entire Old Testament, not just the first 5 books.
And by the way, I want to state I am a believer. So yeah.
Good. No, he's quoting from all the books. In fact, they quote from the Psalms, they quote from Isaiah. It's not just Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, not just the Torah. They're quoting from the entire Old Testament. All right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Zach.
Sir. Thank you, sir.
All right. I don't know why these people can't stay for 3 hours. Come on.
Hi.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
My name's Ken.
Hey, Ken.
Question: how do you respond to the issue about John 7-8 about the story of the adulterous woman and the claims that it was added in later, compared to earlier Greek manuscripts?
Yeah, that's one of 2 places in the New Testament where a significant portion of Scripture is in question. One is the story of the woman caught in adultery, and the other is the end of the Gospel of Mark. And there's different theories about, should it be in there, should it not, that kind of thing. That particular story sure seems like a story from Jesus, doesn't it? Very consistent with Jesus' other teachings. It seems like Jesus. I personally think that is a true story about Jesus. It might not have been exactly where we put it in the Bible, but I think that is a true story of Jesus. Now, if it's not, nothing significant is lost, right? Yep. Just like if the end of the book of Mark isn't really in the Scriptures, all the other stuff in there is taught elsewhere, except handling snakes. That's why I don't handle snakes. So whether it's in there or not isn't going to affect theology significantly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All
it does. I just heard people say it potentially opens up a slippery slope for other claims then.
But the textual critics don't say there are other areas that are in question, significant areas. Those are the 2 after looking through 5,800 manuscripts from, probably early 2nd century all the way to the time of the printing press. Those are the 2 major questions. All the other variants are spelling order or spelling errors or word order, that kind of thing. Nothing significant.
Awesome.
Thank
you. God bless.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Ken. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Angel.
Angelo, go ahead.
No, Angel.
Oh, Angel.
Angel.
Got it.
I was wondering, how can I love, or how can I better love people that I find very hard to love, or people who have hurt me in the past? for example, like family members or friends or former friends? Because at times I do find it hard to love these people.
Yeah, I agree. And I had a question similar to this last night from a high school student. And one of the things that you need to do is meditate on what Jesus did for you and how he forgave you while you were still a sinner. And you can meditate on the scriptures, meditate on the Psalms, and you might, I don't know if you've ever seen The Passion of the Christ, the movie that Mel Gibson put together. If you haven't, you ought to see that.
Not yet.
You ought to see that to get a sense of what Jesus went through to save you. And the only way that we're going to be able to really recognize the magnitude of what Jesus did for us is to meditate on that and then to realize that other people that we need to forgive, we ought to forgive because Christ forgave us. They're made in the image of God, right? Mm-hmm. They should be forgiven just like you should be forgiven when you wrong somebody else. It's a hard thing. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's how you grow in Christ, right?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Cardinals, and I want to mention, thank you for coming. I also want to mention the people out there. Thank you for checking us out online. We'll have a few more of these events this year. We're going to be at LSU and several other colleges coming up, so keep an eye on our website. Also want to mention anybody here or anybody out there that we put all of these events on at college campuses through donations. So we don't charge anybody, obviously, to come here. So if you like the work we're doing, you can donate at crossexamined.org. We're a 501c3. So thank you for coming. Thanks for telling others about it. And by the way, if there's anything here that you heard that you want to see again, it's already on YouTube. Just go to our YouTube channel. By the time you get home, it'll be up, and you can look at anything that we've talked about here, including all the Q&A. All right? So thanks so much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time.